We've been in our message series over the past several weeks. We've called it being a radical disciple. A disciple is simply a believer in Christ, a follower in Christ, one who goes after Christ, a disciple. Not just being called to any type of disciplehood, but called to radical discipleship. We said that God is going to look for ways to reveal himself to you. Think back into your lives that God was visible, that he was, that you could hear him, that you could experience him, that you could almost reach your hand out and touch him. God is going to spend many, many ways, different opportunities, lots of circumstances, trying to reveal himself to you. For some of us, it may be going to the ocean. Others, it may be on a mountaintop. Some, it may be in a maternity ward. Others, it may be in a funeral home. For some, it may be next to a graveside. For some, it may be with the words terminal. For others, it may be with the words promotion. But God will look for lots of ways, many opportunities throughout your life to reveal himself to you. It won't be just once, but it will be multiple times. It'll be different glimpses. And each time that you see God, you will see him in a different perspective, in a different light. God will look for ways, and has looked for ways to reveal himself. We said that after he reveals himself to you, that the first thing that he does is he takes you to his cross. The cross of Christianity is the most significant thing in all of Christianity. It is the most significant thing in all the history of the world. Christians revere the cross. We're told by the Ten Commandments not to worship anything. We don't worship the cross, but we do worship the one who was on the cross. The cross is very important to us because it is at the cross that God shows us his love for us, his undying love. That he reveals himself, he makes himself known to us, and immediately he takes us to the cross because he wants to tell us how much he loves us. When we go to the cross over the years, we try to tame the cross down a little bit. Because when you get to it, it would be rated far harder than R. It's graphic. It's gruesome. It's purposefully painful. When you go to the cross and you experience Jesus dying on the cross, there is agony. There is blood. There is tearing of flesh. There is ridicule. There is water gushing. There is humanity at its worst. It is gruesome. It is horrific. It is moving. The cross cannot be tamed. It cannot be PG or rated G for general audiences. Because if it were, then you would not understand the intensity of the love that God has for you. God who will spend his eternity revealing himself to you. And once he gets your attention, he immediately takes you to the cross. And he wants you to experience the cross of Christ. It's his way of telling you how much he loves you. Somebody once said that Jesus stretched out his arms and he died by telling us his words, "This is how much I love you," by raising and stretching his arms. Now, after I have been to the cross, he calls us all to be ambassadors. It would be great that if we could just come to God, be revealed by God, see God, go to the cross, and then just immediately transition over into heaven. Leave this world and just make it our permanent home and make it happen right then. But that's not going to be the case. He's going to send us back into the world. He calls us to be disciples back into your neighborhood. He calls us to be disciples where you go to work. He calls us to be disciples with your friends. He calls us to be disciples. Some will be very sacrificial. Some will hear the call and go to a monastery. They'll go to places of privacy. Some will go to third world countries. Some will go to the homeless. Some will go to the streets of downtown Baltimore to be this ambassador for Christ. We said in the series already that you are the type of disciple you are by how much you have seen God and by how moved you were at his cross. The Bible tells us when we go back into the world, we are his hands. We are his feet. We are his eyes. We are his mouth. Where we go is where he goes. You look at this portrait that is above me and in front of you, every single week that you come here. And I want it to be a reminder to you that no, Jesus did not give us a physical picture. It's an artist's rendition. But when you look at this portrait, I want you to see his eyes. I want you to see his hands. I want you to see his feet. And I want you to be a reminder to you that Jesus says, this is me, this is you. You will be the only world you will be the only Jesus that the world will ever see. You will be the only voice that many times of Jesus that the world will ever hear. You will be the only compassion of Jesus that the world will ever experience. And if you as an ambassador going back don't do it, then it will not be done. We become ambassadors. I am the type of disciple that I become by how moved I am by the graphicness of the cross, by the love of God through sending his son Jesus to die for us. The Bible tells us that people who've been to the cross have been changed people. But people who have not been to the cross don't understand those of us who have been there. They don't understand why we get up on Sunday mornings, we dress our Sunday best. They don't understand why we sacrificially give our money. They don't understand why we are motivated around the calendar, the schedules, about being in the presence and worshiping God. To them, it's foreign. It's crazy. It's your only day of rest. It's their only day where they can get the chores done around the house. Why in the world would you want to do that? Why would you want to spend that kind of time? The people who have never been to the cross, the people who have never been moved and experienced the love of God through the shedding of his blood, don't understand those of us who have. And that's exactly what Paul told them in Corinthians. He says, I know how well foolishly the message of the cross sounds to those who are on the road to destruction. But we who are being saved recognize this message as the very power of God. There is a difference between those who have been to the cross and those who haven't. You can see by the motivation of your friends who have never been to the cross. They live by a different standard, by a different means. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying they've never been moved by the cross. You understand what I'm talking about. You ever watch on the History Channel some of those alien shows where people who have been visited by an alien from another planet? It all kind of goes in the same type of format where some person, he's normally from deep in the woods someplace, he's out in the middle of a pasture someplace, or he's out by himself, always by himself. A spaceship comes and it lands in front of him. It's got lots of lights all around it. They open up the door and they either bid him to come in, or they come and they take him onto the spaceship. The door shuts. He goes out into outer space, and for an unspecified amount of time, he's out in space. They probe him. They ask questions. They learn as much as they possibly can. They bring him back. They open up the door and they leave him in some cow pasture, and then they go away. Now, that's normally the story. You've heard a story similar to that. You watched it on the History Channel. Now, normally when his friends or his family and those of us watching, we scratch our head and we go, whoa, there's a nutcase if I've ever seen a nutcase. This person's convinced that what he experienced was truly real, but the people around him are looking at him like he's just a bit odd. Well, it's interesting. The same holds true for believers. Those who have been to the cross, they've had that encounter with the cross, we walk away and our lives are changed. Coming back into a regular fellowship with God, with his people, is a priority in our life that nothing else can compare and nothing else makes sense. But to those who have never had that same encounter, they look at us honestly with not understanding, with maybe sometimes a little compassion, but other times just, why do you do what you do? Why is this so important to you? When Peter was writing to the early Christians in his first epistle, his first letter to them, the first chapter, the first verse of Peter, he says to them, he said, to God's elect, he's writing to God's chosen ones, the ones that he chose to reveal himself, take it to the cross. And then he puts a comma there, and you see it in your outlines. He says, to the strangers in the world. You know what a stranger is? A stranger is somebody who is from another place. Have you ever been with somebody who's from another country and they they come over and visit, they will tell you about their homeland. They'll tell you about how they grew up. They'll tell you about their culture, about their foods, and they'll do so with a great fondness. You can just tell that where they come from is where they would really rather be. Well, the Bible tells us that we're from another world. We're from another place. That really, when you look at us and you talk to us, you'll find that we're strangers in this world. That we as believers, we talk about heaven. We talk about our home. We talk about a place of comfort and a place where we desire to be, and our eyes light up. Peter says to God's elect, the chosen, to the strangers that are in this world. The secret to understanding this survival is success as well. At the cross, when we go there, we are forgiven people. We are not perfect people, we're forgiven people. When we go to the cross, we are not pampered, but we are empowered. We're changed. Paul tells Timothy, God did not give us a spirit at the cross to make us afraid, but he gave us a spirit of power, a spirit of love, and a spirit of self-control. After you become a believer, you will make even more mistakes than you ever did before. After you become a believer, you will fail far more than you ever did before. Your lows will be lower than you ever imagined, and you will be exposed many times to the imperfect person that you are, because the world will look at you through a microscope. But Jesus said this in Matthew 10. He said, there's a great irony here. Proclaiming so much love, experiencing so much hate. But don't quit, don't cave in. It's all well worth it in the end. You will not be received with accolades. People will not applaud you. People will not admire your sacrifice and the time and the commitment that you give. But many times it's quite the opposite. Isn't it interesting that the God of love, who says that he'd rather die than live without us, sends Jesus. Jesus' main message when they asked him, they said, could you summarize everything that you're trying to teach us in just a couple sentences? Jesus said, okay, here you go. You want it all. You want the entire law from the Old Testament. You want everything. Genesis all the way through Revelation. Here it is in few sentences. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second is it's equally important to love one another as you love yourself. If you want to follow the love and the commands of God, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love one another as you love yourself. And that summarizes everything. If you do that, you have accomplished what God has called us to do. Now, how in the world could, if that be the essence of the message of Christianity, Jesus be hated as the way he was, be crucified, Christians to be ostracized and sometimes excused from circles, social events, from plans and getting together? Well, the fact of the matter is, we're different. We march to the beat of a different drummer. We're strangers in this world. This world is not our home. This morning, in the time that we have remaining, I want to give you some guarantees of the radical discipleship, of the radical disciple when you're experiencing failure. You're going to experience failure. 5 things to remember when you're experiencing failure. That God only uses people who are willing to risk failure. God will not work with people who live safely. God does not use the world people to change the world that have to have comfort. The Apostle Paul, several years ago, was included in a list of 100 people who were the most influential people in the world that had ever lived. The Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul wrote 13 of the New Testament books of our Bible. The life of Paul was anything but easy. He talks about the beatings. He talks about being exercised. He talks about life becoming very hard when he gave up his Jewish faith to embrace the Christian faith. Here's just a brief look at his resume. This is what made Paul, partially what made Paul, one of the top 100 most influential people in the world. He said, in hard traveling year in and year out, I've had 4 rivers. I've had to fend off robbers. I've had to struggle with friends. I've had to struggle with foes. I've been at risk in the city. I've been at risk in the country. I've been endangered by desert, sun, and sea and storm. I've been betrayed by those I thought were my brothers. I've been in drudgery and hard labor. Many a long and lonely night without sleep. Many a missed meal, blasted by the cold, naked to the weather, and that's not half of it. what made Paul the man that he was? It was the fact that he endured hardships. The fact that I encountered the cross, and I leave the cross, doesn't mean that I'm going to have a cakewalk. It doesn't mean that life is going to be a bed of roses with all the thorns being removed. As a matter of fact, when I leave the cross, sometimes life becomes more difficult for me because my citizenship is truly declared that I am not from this world. Miles McConnelly, in his book, Mr. Blue, he says, you play life safe and you will keep out harm. Be careful, be cautious, don't take risks, and you'll never die upon Mount St. Helens. Your failure is measured by your aspirations. Aspire not, and you cannot fail. Columbus died in chains. Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. Let us live steadily without risk, and life will soon become more than just a thick, gelatinous stream of comfortableness and ignorance. God did not call us to a life of comfort and peace and at ease. That will happen when we get to heaven. Sometimes life in this world is going to be difficult. He's called you to risk. Sometimes risk even means failure. Paul says in Romans 14th chapter, while we live to please the Lord. And when we die, we go to be with the Lord. So in life and in death, we belong to the Lord. Number 2, failure gives us direction. Sometimes I don't even know where I'm going or how to get there until I've failed. In Psalm 119, verse 59, I thought about the wrong direction in which I was headed, and I turned around and I came running back to you. Somebody once asked Winston Churchill where he got the most preparation to lead Great Britain through World War II. Great Britain at one point stood virtually alone against Nazi Germany as they dominated the Western world. Where did he get such leadership, charisma, such strength? Churchill's response was incredible. He said, I learned my leadership when I had to repeat a grade in grade school. The questioner looked back at him and he said, you mean to tell me that you flunked a grade? Churchill's response was classic. He said, I never flunked anything in my life. I was given a second opportunity to get it right. The story was told about a starter gun that was raised at the beginning of the race. On your mark, get set. It looked like every other 100-meter dash that you'd ever seen. The contestants were lined up, and they were ready to run and shoot from the blocks. The crowds were on the edge of their chairs with suspended anticipation. The starter fired the gun, the contestants sprang out of the starting blocks, and even the casual observer could tell that this 100-meter dash was different. This was the Special Olympics. It was special because all of the participants were developmentally and physically disabled. It was special far greater for a reason than that. Because it was special because in the 100-meter dash, the runners were all running side by side, shoulder to shoulder down the track, when suddenly one of the young women tripped and she fell headlong. She went rolling across the pavement, and then as she turned and said her ankle was twisted, she was crying, she was embarrassed, she was in pain. The rest of the contestants continued to run another 10 or 15 feet, and then without anybody saying anything to the others, they all stopped. They all turned around and they went back, and they picked up their friend who had fallen. They dusted her off, they kissed her sore, and they put their arms around her, and together, all of them continued to run the race. This time when they crossed the finish line, it wasn't one, it was all of them. They were runners who would rather win together than win individually. The stands went crazy. Nobody has ever cheered for a winner of a race like they cheered that day for those running the Special Olympics. David says in Psalm 34, verse 19, disciples often get into trouble. Still, God is going to be there every time. If we could go back into our life and have some do-overs, what would your do-over be? What would you like to do differently? Maybe it was a failure. Maybe it was something a choice that you made that just became horrible. The effects of you still live. What is it? If you could go back and you could have a do-over. Immediately, the very first thing that we think of when we can go back and we can do over the hard sides, the betrayals, where friends treated us badly, where we got the short end of the stick. It's kind of interesting if you were to go back and have that ability to take those things away. You probably would not have developed where you are today. You would not be as mature as you are today. You would not have the wisdom that you have today. It is in the failures that God uses to give us direction. I know in a difficult time of my life that I've gone through, you go through and you accumulate what we call friends. On Facebook, when somebody likes you or they accept you as a friend on there, and sometimes people will have hundreds of friends. You got to go through life and you accumulate what we call friends. But in the truth of the matter is they're acquaintances. And then you go through a fire. Sometimes the fire is cancer. Sometimes the fire is a disease. Sometimes the fire is a divorce. Sometimes the fire is being fired. Sometimes the fire, and whatever it is. And all of a sudden, you find that when you go through the fire, that many of your acquaintances don't go through the fire with you. And really, you need to have those times in your life to kind of weed out, to narrow down. But you maybe not have hundreds of friends, but you look around at the ones who went through the fire with you, you know the ones that you can truly count on, the ones that are truly your friends. If we had to do do-overs in life, many of us would take away our failures, the hurts, the pains. But it is in those times that we're going to find God gives us direction to failure. Number 3, risk of failure keeps us closer to God. Do you know that when people are closer to God is when they are hurting as opposed to when they are successful? When we're successful, we have a tendency to go it alone. We take the victories on our own, and we take the accolades on our own, but it's when we are filled and there's nobody around and there's nothing left that we look around and we find that God is the only one that's left. It was a few nights following Payne Stewart's second PGA Open victory. He died less than 6 months from this particular event. They had brought in all of his friends and his family to pay tribute to this great golfing champ. They put a big focal point up on top of the film that night, and they showed him winning and dropping that ball into the final cup, and they saw the victory. His pastor was there that night, and he saw Payne walk away as he saw the images of himself winning and giving credit to the glory of God. Payne walks away, he's wiping the tears, and Jamie Collinsworth walked over to him. He said, "I noticed that you're trying to hide the tears." He said, Collinsworth calls, he said, so I put my arms around him and I said, "Payne, I just want you to know that I appreciate what God's doing in your heart." 6 months before he died, tears flowing down his face, Payne Stewart said, "I'm not going to be a Bible thumper. I'm going to stand up. I'm not going to stand up until I'm stunned. But I want everybody to know it's all about Jesus." Even with cancer and it being terminal, he still wanted the people to know that it was all about Jesus. Brandon Manning says it like this. He says, "The landmark moments of my life are that handful of decisions that involve risk. The decision to seek ordination to the priesthood, to join a monastery, to live in a cave, to seek help for my addiction to alcohol, to marry. On the last day when we stand before the risen Christ, each one of us will become a sum of our total choices." It's okay to risk. We need to risk safety and security, comfort, failure, because it is in those failures that many times that we see, experience, get a glimpse of God, and we get our direction. The Bible says that when we get to heaven, that God is not going to condemn us because of the times we attempted and we failed, but He is going to reward us for the attempt. The Master will say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling the small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities." The greater the risk, the greater the rewards. Number 4, success is birthed from failure. Most successes come from failing. Without failure, we would not have success. Matthew 26, Jesus said, "Surely to Peter, you are one of those who follow Jesus." Then Peter began to curse and place himself up under the swear. He said, "I don't know who this man is." And at once the rooster crowed. When you look through the New Testament heroes of the Bible, it doesn't take you long to get to the name Peter. Peter is one of the most significant people in the Bible. Peter was not always the man that we know him as today. Peter was a fisherman. He was rough around the edges. He would be the kind of person that if you were going to go to a dinner party, you would not want to invite Peter to go. Probably be kind of rough hands, probably dirty under the fingernails, probably kind of smell a little bit from the sea. He'd be weathered. He'd be not shaven. His clothes would be a little bit on the unkept side. He would not be the social person that you would want to take. Whenever it came time for Peter to stand up and say something, he normally said the wrong thing. It's one of those things where you go, Peter, I wish you'd talk, and then he'd talk and go, I wish you'd shut up. Peter was the one who will go down in history as being the one who really failed his friend Jesus. When Jesus was being pushed up against the wall, when the crucifixion was imminent, and the people looked around at Peter and said, hey, aren't you the man that has been traveling with him? I recognize your accent. I recognize you as being a Galilean. Aren't you the man? And it says that Peter did not only just say, no, I don't know him, but it says he began to curse and to swear, I don't know Jesus. Looking through the Bible at the beginning, if you looked at Judas, you'd say, now there's a fine person, there's an example of who I would like to be. He was the one that was given responsibility to the finances of the apostles. He was a political person. He was a clever person. He was a smart person. He could maneuver and manipulate the people without them even knowing that they were being maneuvered and manipulated. He was always there and always seeming to do the right thing, always seemed to be concerned about the finances of the Savior. But when push came to shove, he was the one that would go down in history as being the one who denied and sold out on Jesus, who betrayed Jesus. Flash forward into church history. Peter and Judas. Peter goes down as being a rock. He fumbled, he stumbled, he said all the wrong things, did not necessarily do the right things, but in the end, became one of the most successful of all Christians. Judas, who started off strong, politically correct, will go down in history as being a name that is synonymous with betrayal. It's not how you start the game, it's how you finish the game that counts. Dan Sommer said it like this. He said, God uses broken things, broken soil to produce a crop, broken clouds to give up rain, broken grain to give bread, broken bread to give strength. It is the broken alabaster box that gives forth the perfume. It is Peter weeping bitterly who returns to greater power than ever. The Bible says no matter where you are and the pain that you've experienced, that God will take the bad and place it for the good. Isaiah 61, he will give beauty for ashes, joy instead of mourning, praise instead of heaviness, for God has planted them like strong and graceful oaks for his own glory. Cheryl Forbes in the Art of Christianity Today. She said, somehow we never see God in failure, but only in success. A strange attitude for people who have a cross at the center of their faith. Isn't that interesting? We only look at God as being a God of success. We don't look at him as a failure. Strange attitude for those of us who have the cross at the center of their faith. Fred Smith said, success doesn't mean everything in our lives have turned out well. You can be successful in coming back from a fall. Finally, the last thing I want to share with you about failure is that believers cannot fail because failure is part of God's plan. Romans 8, chapter 28 verse says, that's why we can be sure that every detail in our life of love of God is worked out into something good. God says that for the believer, those who have been to the cross, that there is no failure in your life because he will even take the brokenness and he will build it as a foundation, a strong foundation. It's a promise. Theodore Roosevelt said these words. He said, the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly and who errs, who at best knows the end and triumphs of a high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those who are cold, timid souls, who never knew the victory or never knew the defeat. Cindy Holmes is a pediatric nurse who works in Houston, Texas. She wrote this story about a live encounter that she had with one of her patients. She said, little Tyler was born infected with HIV. From the outset, he was dependent upon all kinds of medications, and sometimes he needed supplemental oxygen. But Cindy said it didn't slow him down. He was all boy, a little dynamo. He frequently raced through Houston neighborhood with a backpack full of medications that he had to take. Sometimes he'd pull his little red, white, or radio flyer wagon with the oxygen in it, but that didn't slow him down. Often he would go through the neighborhood and he played just like the rest of the children. Cindy Holmes got to know them because they were confined in the hospital in the last stages of their illness, both little Tyler and his mother. They were both dying. When it became obvious to Tyler's mother that he would probably die first, she decided that she needed to talk to him about what was going to come next. She pulled little Tyler to her bed and they talked about life, love, and fun. Then she brought up the topic of heaven. She said, "You know, Tyler, I was kind of hoping that you were going to do your growing up here on this side, on this planet, on the earth. But the doctors are saying that your body is telling them that you might have to move on and you may have to grow up in heaven." She continued. "So you know I made a decision." Tyler asked, "What's that, Mommy?" She said, "I've decided that if you're going to live in heaven, then I'm going to do that too. Because wherever you are, that's where I want to be." A few days later, Cindy Holmes was in Tyler's room. She looked at him and he looked up at her and said, "Miss Holmes, would you do me a favor?" Cindy said, "Sure, Tyler. What is it? What do you need me to do?" He said, "When I die, would you make sure that you put me in a red shirt?" Cindy answered, "Tyler, why would you want me to put you in a red shirt?" Tyler explained. He says, "Well, Mom says that when I die, I'm going to go to heaven, and that's where I'm going to do my growing up. And I've been told that heaven is fun, and that it's nonstop play. And when I get to heaven, I'm going to have friends. I'm going to have lots of friends. And they're going to be playing with me, and I'm going to be playing with them all the time. And when my mommy comes, and she's coming up later after me, I may be too busy. And she may begin to look for me. And if I'm too busy and I don't see her coming, I want her to see me first. So it's really important that you do that favor for me. Would you put me in a red shirt?" Tyler looked up from the bed and continued, "You know, heaven wouldn't be heaven without Mommy." Cindy Holmes said, "I was overwhelmed by his inexpressible sense of peace that was on his face at a time of inexpressible crisis." Paul says in Philippians, the 1st chapter, 22nd verse, "For me to live is Christ, but for me to die